From the city of broad shoulders, this is Chicago Unscripted with CBS News Chicago's Joe Donlan.
Sarah Spain knows what she wants and likes and supports, and she isn't shy about speaking up and sharing her opinions on any and all of it. You may know her from her years on ESPN and shows like Around the Horn, a show ESPN recently canceled. She has some thoughts on that and what's happened with the content at the worldwide leader. These days, you can hear her on her podcast, Good Game with Sarah Spain. She proudly says there's no other daily women's sports show like it. That's where we start, talking about the WNBA, its recent explosion in popularity, and how much the players in the league should be paid. If there's a debate about women's sports, Sarah likely has a take, and it often leads to blowback, which is a story unto itself. Google her and you'll see what I mean. We get into some of her recent Twitter spats and the online headlines targeting her, the role of social media in her world, and we cover another controversial topic, transgender athletes. I wanted to get her on to talk about the book she just wrote, Runs in the Family. It's an outstanding read and fascinating story about the life of Dylan McCullough, his journey through a difficult and at times traumatic life with the parents who adopted him, his path to the NFL, and the ultimate chapter of his life that revealed the almost unbelievable twist about his birth parents. Sarah admits she has life FOMO. She doesn't want to miss out on anything, and it shows. She's pretty much done it all: radio, TV, podcasting, writing, sports, even food, and politics. Born in Cleveland, she always claims Chicago as home. Here's the self-described, opinionated, and outspoken Sarah Spain. Sarah, thank you so much for the time. It's great to have you on.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
I know you're busy. You're coming off the WNBA All-Star Game. How was it?
It was a blast, man. Indy does such a good job of those events because everything is so close. So you can hit up all the activations and events and WNBA Live and parties and games and everything without getting stuck in traffic, or you could even walk to most of them. And I think folks who have not been to one of those big weekends would be shocked at all the different brand activations, sponsors, celebrities, live shows. It's really becoming such an awesome destination weekend for women's sports fans.
Didn't it feel different this year because it was sold out, right? And that hasn't always been the case. You can feel that things are changing.
Yeah,
in the league.
I mean, it's been sold out for a couple of years, but yeah, I mean, I think every year it's less about the game itself, which always has incredible energy, and it's more about what else is there going on all around the weekend, all around the city that you're in to help supplement. And I mean, this year. And one of them, as silly as it sounds, is parties. When you go to the Super Bowl or NBA All-Star, you see these brands descend and want to put their money and their name and their efforts into these giant events. And I couldn't fit in all the parties. And to see all the different folks who showed up, whether that's Diplo DJing a party or Flau'jae from, LSU basketball player who's also a rapper performing and performing starting at 12:30, 1 a.m. and the party's going till 3 or 4. Like, it's legit. It's not a cocktail hour with one booze sponsor giving you a couple free drinks.
Let's talk about the state of the game, Sarah, because one of the big storylines that came out of the WNBA All-Star Game was the T-shirts we saw during the pregame warm-ups. Pay us what you owe us is, I believe, what it said, right? And it got a lot of attention.
Yeah, I mean, it's something we've been covering in the women's sports space for months, knowing that the WNBA Players Association opted out of their CBA, their collective bargaining agreement. So they are in ongoing negotiations with the league for a new CBA. This is coming as a new TV rights deal is set to start next year that's worth over $2 billion. This is coming as valuations for teams are skyrocketing. The brand new Golden State Valkyries, who haven't even finished a full season of play yet, are now the highest valued team at over $500 million. The New York Liberty just sold a piece of equity to help fund a new training facility. They were valued at $450 million at the time. You've got this massive influx of investment, and the players are only getting a little over 9% of the revenue share. Now, what people need to understand in sports is that the economics are not the same as everywhere else. It is sort of like a startup in the sense of what you put in and what you get out are not always going to be the true tale of how successful or how profitable the business is or can be. The NBA wasn't profitable for 40 years. The NFL wasn't profitable for 50 years, and yet players were getting a much higher percentage of revenue than WNBA players are getting now, even in those early years of those leagues. So what they're saying is not, we want NBA player money. What they're saying is we want a higher percentage of revenue that comes in every year because the split right now is so vastly different than every other professional league.
Right. Are you okay with pay us what you owe us? It felt to me like it maybe would have been, and maybe it's semantics, but pay us what we're worth.
I think the difference there is pay us what we're worth is not just present and is present and future looking. Pay us what you owe us to me is you have back pay.
Okay.
We're trying to imply that for some time now, you haven't been paying us what we're worth. And I think the difference is, and I wasn't in the meetings for when they decided what it would say on the shirts. And I hopefully will have some players on who were and can ask them why they selected that. But to me, one of the conversations around the W of late has been about Caitlin Clark and the explosion of popularity with her arrival, which is 100% true. But the analogy that I always use is Caitlin Clark is a match that you put onto a bonfire that was already built. To ignore the 25 plus years of history of a league that has had tremendous success in the past and at times was held back with intention. Those early years when they were on national broadcast television like ABC, when they were on big ESPN, they were millions and millions of viewers. And there was an executive who, it has come out recently in a book, with intention decided he didn't think the W was a good product and started burying it on ESPN2. And it affected their ratings. It affected their ability to draw viewers. So the decision-making of people at the top has affected whether or not the growth continued or whether it stalled and even went backwards at times. And so, yes, Caitlin Clark and the arrival of these NCAA stars who built new names and brands, especially in the NIL era, has been very helpful to the league. But my guess would be that the shirts are pointing to the fact that this is a league that has been driving revenue, that has been growing, and that has had players who are deserving of better pay for some time.
Part of what I struggle with, Sarah, is the what's disclosed. I don't really know what the revenue is. You mentioned the new TV contract. I don't know what it used to be. And it seems, I read in the Washington Post that the league lost $40 million. You see that. There's no denying what's happening to it now with the team valuations you mentioned, not to mention the expansion fee, which I guess Portland and the Valkyries you mentioned, it was $50 million. Now it's $250 million to get in the game. It's clear there's people who are willing to invest in this. How does that get back to the players? And what counts as revenue, I guess, is my big question there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the problem with sports accounting is we always know that leagues are using very clever reporting in order to make sure that either on the taxes side or the revenue share side or any other part that they can best benefit their own interests, right? I bet you don't know that as of 8 years ago, ESPN uncovered that 50% of NBA teams were not profitable on their own. We don't see that reporting in the men's side because we view it as an investment, right? We understand that the product is worthy. So, or Netflix, let's take it out of the sports world. When Netflix spends the majority of its existence up until the last couple of years in the red, we understand that they are building, like a startup does, with an influx of money that's far more than what they get back and report every year, with a long-term goal for growth. And when that happens on the men's side, which is a through line across all of sports, we believe in the potential of men's sports and the value of the product. When it happens on the women's side, it makes headlines. It becomes the dominating narrative around whether or not they have any value.
I had a friend who used to say, none of us makes what we're worth. We make what we negotiate. And the time for the WNBA to negotiate is now. So where do you think it ends? Because you mentioned 9% of revenue is what the players get. In other men's sports, I believe it's closer NHL, NFL, and Major League Baseball is like 50%.
Yep.
So, okay, where does that number end up? Because I think any way you look at it, I saw a story the other day that said a manager at In-N-Out makes more than a player for the WNBA. But someone argued, well, In-N-Out makes, I don't even know how many billions a year. But the fact that the rookies are making, what is it, like $87,000? Anyone can look at that and look at the numbers and look at what we've been talking about here and say that's ridiculous.
Well, and also worth noting, how many in and out managers are there across the country? There's only 150 something players in the W, right?
Hmm.
So you're also saying that that one manager makes X percentage. What percentage of the large revenue? Yada, yada, yada. Again, it's very hard to do the apples and oranges kind of comparisons across things like a fast food restaurant and a sports league. It's a lot easier to do it within sports, which to your
Hmm.
point is usually about a 50-50 revenue split. So Nobel Prize winning economist Claudia Golden did an opinion piece for the New York Times breaking down if she used the same metrics across the NBA and the WNBA, whether that's viewership, attendance, merch sales, etc., divided it by the number of players, the number of games, the number of opportunities for the eyeballs essentially to be in place, whether viewing, seeing, buying, etc. That the NBA currently, compared to the WNBA players make roughly 1/80th of NBA salaries on average. And it should be, based on her numbers, closer to 1/3 or 1/4. Do I think that's what they'll get? Probably not. I don't think it will go up to them getting a third or a fourth of what NBA players make, even if the numbers point to that. But I do think they need to get a hell of a lot closer to a 50-50 revenue split and a hell of a lot closer to recognizing what they always say at the league, which is the players are the reason for our success.
All right, let's move on to your Chicago roots, because that's one of the many reasons I wanted to talk with you. You grew up here. They're deep. You grew up in Lake Forest. How old were you when you moved here? Because you were born in Cleveland, right?
Yeah, just a couple years old. So thankfully, I have no allegiance to Cleveland sports and never felt a pull between one or the other. It was always just I'm from Chicago. Grew up in the burbs and live downtown now.
So at the introduction, it would be a sophomore out of
Lake
Chicago.
Forest, yeah, Lake Forest,
Really?
Illinois. Yeah.
All right. So you were quite an athlete here back in the day, track, field hockey, basketball. What do you remember most about your time growing up here?
Gosh, it's funny. I had such an idyllic childhood. Obviously, Lake Forest, a great place to grow up. And I remember being like, why would anyone move anywhere else? There's earthquakes in California and there's, tornadoes and there's mudslides, whatever. And then, of course, I got out in the big world and I was like, oh, diversity and differences and a lot of other stuff that you don't see a lot of in Lake Forest. I just remember that I loved playing sports 24 hours a day, all the time. And now that I'm an adult, I really am grateful to my parents for the amount of driving and expense and time that goes into fueling your kids' ambitions. I was also all state in band and chorus. I was like that kid that wanted to do all the things all the time. I still am. I think I have like life FOMO. I never want to miss out on anything.
Yeah,
So I just
check your
do
Instagram
stuff.
feed and you'll get
Yeah.
that in a hurry.
I'm not great at relaxing. But yeah, no, I had a amazing junior high and high school experience, and yeah, have always felt deeply tied to this place and the city and its surroundings.
And then you ran track at Cornell. How did you get to that decision? Not that it was an option for me.
Yeah. I got recruited for all three sports. And so it was sort of like I wanted to be a little fish in a big pond. I wanted to go Division I and I wanted to get the best education I could get. So it was really a combination of I wanted to play basketball in college, but most of my offers were for Division III schools. And so I thought Ivy League education, Division I sports. And the nice thing about track that I discovered once I got there, of course, is it's a little bit easier to balance. All of your meets are on the weekends. You're not leaving in the middle of the week for games, missing classes. And so I could really balance a great education, time with my friends, and being an athlete. Gosh, I just loved Cornell. Beautiful campus, great people, great everything.
Yeah. What was your major?
English.
And then, so what was the plan? What did you want to do?
Like I had a plan. What I always wanted to do was be on Saturday Night Live. That's still my life's dream. But because I did three sports in band and chorus in high school, school plays were always at the same time as sports. So I did the talent show at Lake Forest a couple times, singing and dancing and fun stuff like that. And when I got to Cornell, being a theater major, first of all, my parents, I think, wisely said, what if you don't end up wanting to do that? It's a restrictive major. You can't use it for as much. And also same time as track practices and everything else. So I've sort of prioritized sports as I knew I wasn't going to the Olympics. So this is going to be my last 4 years of competing. be an English major, take classes in the drama department, take classes all over. It was a really nice major in terms of being able to be free with the classes that I took and the things I was interested in. And then moved to LA right after I graduated to see, do I really want to do this? Am I good at it? What does it look like to be in this space and do comedy and acting, and like fail fast and decide to do something else if it's not a fit? It didn't occur to me that I could even do it. It wasn't that I thought I'm not allowed, I'm not good enough. It did not occur to me, the idea that I could work in sports. I didn't see it anywhere. And so my teacher came up and said, "Oh, you want to work in sports?" I said, "Oh, no, there's no women in sports. It's, Erin Andrews. You have to be like a supermodel. And I also want to be funny and be satirical. And there's no funny women in sports." And she said, "Well, it just feels very natural. Like you could give it a shot." So I took a class at UCLA Extension, sorry, which is classes for graduates, older folks, non-enrollees in TV sports reporting. And I was like, my mind is blown. This is all the things that I love: extemporaneous thinking, the improv stuff in interviews, something I feel very comfortable doing. And that's when I sort of pivoted to sports.
But you did come back to Chicago at some point early on, right? Weren't you doing what was the Chicago's Best, right? I mean,
yeah,
on WGN.
I was in Chicago. I was in LA for 6 years. And when I made the pivot to sports, I thought, I want to be with my teams. As someone who had not grown up wanting to be in the business, I was watching for fun. And when I got my first job at Fox Sports Net, I was watching games every day, writing down all the highlights, choosing the highlights for a live show at the end of the night, and writing what the anchor person would say about the highlights. And I realized I really needed to learn all the rules of hockey, offside and blue line and everything else. And I needed to learn nitty gritty about NASCAR and other things that I wasn't that into. And so I thought, if I want to make it in this biz, I should go back to Chicago, where I've got a love of the teams and I know about their history and their players. That'll make it easier for me. So I moved back and started out with a startup company called Mouthpiece Sports. That was a website intended to bring the athletes without the spin of the owners who owned all the networks and the teams. And then Chicago's Best. Yeah, that was, honestly, I can't remember how I first got that audition, but hosted that for a bit, hosted WGN Radio for a little bit, wrote for Chicago Now, the website that was a spinoff of the Tribune, did a handful of things before I got my first anchor job at ESPN 1000.
And right, yeah. Most people know you, Sarah, from your time at ESPN, and I certainly saw you, I guess, probably most on Around the Horn, but you're no longer there. The show was canceled. What happened?
We're all trying to figure that out. It was getting great ratings. It wasn't super pricey. A lot of the talent was in-house already. It was also a great way to showcase talent in-house in a different way. They're really not sure, to be honest. I still do work for espnW, and I still am close with a lot of folks over there. And I'm curious about some of the decisions they've been making in general around their programming. I know a lot of it is in advance of the direct-to-consumer streaming network that they're launching. So it might be that they're just starting to back off of studio shows and shoulder programming and focusing on the things that they have rights deals for and properties like SportsCenter. But yeah, it's confusing because PTI is also a studio show, and their solution at one point, what was leaked was that they would just expand that to an hour. But Mike and Tony didn't come to an agreement in terms of what their contract would look like for double the work. And that's a studio show too. So why would you take away one to expand another if the goal is to get more towards the content you're going to use on DTC? So I'm not sure, to be honest. I will say this much: as much of a bummer as it was, 23 years is a really long run. And because it leaked and the announcement came early, it did allow for the show to really do a great job of saying goodbye, they got to have the great 20th anniversary episode that everybody loved. They got to bring all the great folks back, me and Bob Ryan and Jackie McMullen, all these folks that had been on it, and Jamel Hill were allowed to come back for one last episode. Tony was allowed to get his flowers as someone who I think was really underappreciated for the amount of talent and skill it took to know everything while doing the scoring, while being clever and quick and funny and smart and having all these references. Honestly should have been nominated, I think, for sports Emmys every year and wasn't. But that part of it was nice. At least most people don't get that long runway of a goodbye.
Well, we're all sort of going through this and trying to navigate what's ahead with streaming and everything else that's upended. But I think that leads me into something else I did want to talk to you about, and that's just a quick Google search on you will find no shortage of controversies with you right in the middle. And one of them had to do with you criticizing ESPN, if I have this right, for not having more journalists. And you pointed to Stephen A. and Pat McAfee. What was your point in making that?
Yeah, it wasn't for not having more journalists. It was, I think, it was a question, and I said in the clip, which of course didn't make it into most of the aggregated content, that it was above my pay grade, but that watching from afar, I'm curious how ESPN continues to stay above the fray, and as the worldwide leader, if you can no longer trust that what you hear on it is journalistically vetted. So what I mean by that is, with the rights for sports being bifurcated more than ever, you can get it on Amazon, Apple, Netflix, all the different places. ESPN used to be the only place that you really got a lot of the rights and a lot of the sports you wanted to see. And if you saw it on ESPN, it was right? If Adam Schefter reports a trade's going to happen, the trade happens. If you watch something on SportsCenter and they give you a statistic, you trust that it's been vetted and sourced and they're coming out with correct information. When you have folks like Pat McAfee, who, for instance, can do an entire show about the Olympic boxer who potentially might have differences of sex hormones, we're not sure yet, that's still to be decided, but is not a trans athlete. And he spends a whole hour talking about how that athlete is a trans athlete. That's just factually incorrect. And I think when he has, Aaron Rodgers on to talk about how the NFL is potentially rigging their Super Bowls. And if you look at the colors of the Super Bowl logo, you can tell who's going to be in it, which clearly has been disproved multiple times, or has him on to talk about how vaccines don't work or whatever else. Like, you're muddying the waters of whether what you're seeing on ESPN is accurate or not. Now, Pat McAfee's show is very clearly not SportsCenter.
Right.
It's not presenting itself as straight up journalism. But the fans don't know that McAfee's show is produced in its own and then bought by ESPN, that ESPN doesn't produce it, right? It's a show that is made and then put onto the air, but fans don't know that. And so if you ask ESPN, they'll say this is an independent production that we air and it's different, but the fans don't know that. Stephen A., my example there was Dana White was caught on camera, UFC head, hitting his wife. There's plenty you could say about that. There's plenty of context that you can add to that, but he said on SportsCenter he didn't want to talk about it because it's a close personal friend of his. That's not how journalism works. That's not how ESPN works. You can't pick and choose. And I think the rules that have applied to ESPN talent for years are not being applied to those two, and it's muddying the waters. And when you're turning on ESPN, for me, the thing that keeps you separate from the, blogs or other content that's getting more popular is that it's a vetted journalistic source and it's a place for news. And I just wonder if people can, because of the way people see it as one big place, in a different way than they see like ABC as a collection of shows. They see ESPN as one company, and it makes it hard to differentiate.
But isn't that good for Stephen A. to point out that he has a conflict on this? I mean, sometimes, journalists do have conflicts and they'll remove themselves from covering the story. That's just part of it. But the bigger picture to me, Sarah,
I agree with that, but I'll say that I think that if you are, what it is to be a journalist is to say, this is a personal friend of mine, but I would never condone X, or this is worth talking about. Not, we're not going to cover it on the show because it's a friend of mine.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
Well, somebody else could have, is my point. I guess. Somebody else. But I guess we're getting into this point where I'm wondering, because the same thing's happening in news. You turn on and you don't know whether this is an opinion show or whether it's a news show.
Yeah.
And this is, I think, part of the problem with how we've gotten to where we are, as divided as we are in this country, because there's so much misinformation about so many different things. But I don't know that I turn on ESPN and say, oh, I know the difference between Adam Schefter and Big Perk, our former player. Right. I know what I'm getting with that. And so much of the programming has gone to now analysis, right? And so how important is journalism when you're just sitting around a table arguing about a point or who should be the MVP or whatever with players who used to be in the league? Is that where it's going, you think?
Yeah, I'm not silly enough to not understand that there are different things in shows you're watching. Some are more opinion-based, some are more news-based. I think the difference is, how do you make sure that you are still a place that people believe it when you tell them you're delivering news, that it's accurate and vetted and sourced? If the standards of journalism that you used to uphold across the entire network are now much looser in all the other places. That was just my question. And I agree with you in general. I think it's very difficult right now because essentially we all live in our own reality and our own set of facts based on the choices that we make in terms of media. We don't have those nightly news shows that the entire country turns on and sees and hears. A lot of people are lacking digital literacy to know whether the website they're reading or the story they're hearing is filled with facts and has been vetted. And I think that's just a really difficult space to live in. And it's why it's very difficult in political spaces and other important spaces to get the right information out.
Well, it's what we all battle. Everyone has, their phone and they scroll through and feel like they have an idea of what happened today and they don't turn the news on like they used to. It's just when something big happens that they turn it on, or if they want analysis, which is where so much of this has gone. But these controversies that you find yourself in the middle of, is that just part of the deal when you're in the sports opinion world?
I think it's twofold. I think one, it's being a woman in a male-dominated sports space. I have found over the course of my career that the most often I get death threats and hatred and awful things is when I'm talking about serious issues, whether that's sexual assault, rape, intimate partner violence, issues of male versus female, whether that's things like the WNBA salaries or otherwise, women's sports. It's a lot of truly, you do not belong here. Not I disagree with your opinion on that quarterback, but you should not be allowed to talk about this. You should not be allowed to be here. You should not be allowed. It's getting better. There are so many more women in this space than when I started. But so part of it I am very, very clear on is being a woman, an opinionated woman, an outspoken woman, not one who just shows up and says, "Hi guys, I'm here to give you your sports updates." It's the idea of being empowered and certain in myself. The other is I'm a progressive person who is not shy about giving opinions on complicated and nuanced issues. You're ultimately going to be a
target.
Thank you for things. There's certain sites that have a handful of ESPN folks or former ESPN folks that they seem to insert in a lot of stories for clicks, right? There'll be a story about one of my fellow former ESPNers and I will constantly pop up in it. They'll have a series of 5 or 6 of us that they accuse of being woke or that they think represent something, and they'll repeatedly bring us up all the time. And so I think it's as simple as, I posted a tweet the other day that I thought it was an interesting choice to have a comedian host the ESPYs who didn't make funny jokes about some of the women's athletes or women's leagues. He just made fun of them in a way that wasn't clever or smart. So you've got an award show where you're giving Diana Taurasi, a WNBA legend, an icon award for her career. And the host starts the show by saying nobody knows or cares about the WNBA. It felt incongruous to me. It wasn't that I can't take a joke. He made some funny jokes about Caitlin Clark. He made some funny jokes about Simone Biles. And then he also said Megan Rapinoe couldn't be here tonight. Good. And then when people didn't laugh, he said, we're supposed to pretend she's a good time.
Right.
That's not a joke.
That didn't land for me either because I don't know her. I don't know if she is or isn't.
It's not a joke. And she's hosted that show before and she's worked, So again, it just felt incongruous to me to insult without anything clever or smart or funny about it, these things while you're also elevating and saying women's sports are great. Here's a bunch of awards for them. That was what I was pointing out. And the reason I think that ends up getting 20 headlines is because it's interesting when somebody, former ESPN, or I still work with them, but I'm not full-time like I used to be, says anything critical of them. So then people are going to spin and make sure that they, make a big story out of it, even if it's just one tweet.
I know the headline because I saw it and wrote it down. You'll never guess the one miserable ex-ESPN staffer who took offense to Shane Gillis's ESPY monologue.
I'm not even going to name the outlet, but that's the outlet that is
I could tell. It's everywhere.
Consistently pumping out my name. It's a far-right outlet who uses shit stirring to engage its people.
Why feed it, Sarah? When you're at an event like that, you know it's going to be edgy and spicy and controversial, and some of the jokes land and some don't. But they go after pretty much everyone. Why not just swallow that tweet?
Okay, so 2 things. One, they do go after everyone, but again, it's clever. And that was my point, is why are we being smart and clever in these jokes? And then this joke is just, I don't like that person who has hosted this event before, or nobody cares about this. even though this is about to get a bunch of awards. It's feeding into the same tired, antiquated BS about women's sports are bad, nobody cares, blah, blah, blah. So that was what I was pointing out. As for why, I almost didn't tweet it. It feels like putting things out into this like space for no reason. Often I don't tweet anymore at all because that space in particular has gotten so toxic. What I'm seeing in the sports world is a creeping back in of an embrace of misogyny and things that I had to deal with early in my career that had been getting better, and sitting back and not pointing out when I see that again, not pointing out that ESPN would not have had a host like Shane Gillis and would not have allowed for things like that and would not have had Pat McAfee who calls Caitlyn a white bitch on his show. They wouldn't, when I see these things changing, I can sit back and be like, I don't want to get killed for that. Or I can say, I don't care if I get killed for that. I want to keep making note of it. I want to keep making public that I don't think that this is the way things should be.
Well, aren't you feeding it though, Sarah? That's my question. And that's, these guys just wait for you to tweet and then jump all over it.
I guess the question
by not
is
saying, to your point, look, I get the joke. It was a joke, wasn't funny to me, but I'm going to move on. We are where we are. It's getting way better. Let's move on and not give them the fuel.
I guess it's just a question of whether you think that being silent about something you disagree with is a better choice or saying something. And I see your point. I mean, I see it can be seen as fuel for them. It can also be seen as proof to other people watching that they're not alone in thinking that we don't want to head that direction.
No.
A reminder to people, I think courage is contagious. I think continuing to speak up in the face of things that you think are wrong, or a direction you think we're going in that's going to be bad, or a return to behaviors that you thought we had moved past. If you don't say anything, it's a sort of tacit approval or a complicity in at least not allowing others to think there's people out there that also disagree with this, or there's people out there that also think that this is a disrespectful or bad choice, or, you know, and I truly see your point of let it die. And literally spend 99.99% of the time not acknowledging, addressing, or responding to the worst of the worst.
Yeah.
And not feeding them.
Do you listen to Sam Harris at all, Making Sense, his podcast?
Every once in a while.
Yeah. He said something the other day. He got off social media altogether. And he said something that resonated with me because I, for the most part, have as well. I'll check to see what's trending and maybe see what people are talking about. But he said it was so clearly a net negative in my life in so many ways. Even the good stuff on further analysis was part of the bad stuff. And if you can't have that epiphany, if you think it's too important to be on social media for your career or some other reason, then you're stuck with it. But in essence, he said, notice the effect it's having on your day. It's digital sewage for the most part that's spilling into my life. And I didn't want any more to do with it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great choice for a lot of people. I think I have backed off social media a ton. I'm mostly in spaces that are about actual conversation. And that's why I'm not posting on X very often or Twitter. My new show, Good Game with Sarah Spain, is the first and only daily women's sports show. It's part of iHeart, which is a massive place. But iHeart, in its promotion, wouldn't be posting every single show I do and getting it out to the audience that I've already built for sports fans, right? And iHeart is not a sports company. So I do go on every day to post the show of the day, to post social clips and audio clips, to engage with listeners of my show and figure out what do you want to hear more of, what guests do you want to have on, to follow along with the storylines. And in women's sports in particular, because the major media outlets in a lot of cases aren't doing the best job of covering them, the W in particular is prone to some pretty messed up narratives and conversations as a result of people parachuting in without understanding the storylines and the narratives. And so I need to use those online spaces full of actual players and fans and content creators who know the space to inform my understanding of the league and how conversations are going to happen on my show. But yeah, I mean, I'm on it way less than I used to be, and I'm very selective about the spaces that I'm in and how I interact. I don't sit and wade into the comments. I think I use it the same way I used to in this one sense, which is, for instance, with the WNBA, CBA conversations. When I see loud voices in particular perpetuating stereotypes or sharing misinformation, I take the opportunity to offer up facts, or I take the opportunity to say, hey, that's actually not right. Here's this, here's this, here's this. And I think a lot of people are watching and paying attention. And if you let wrong information be the only information that's talked about, people presume it's correct, right? Oh, I keep seeing that. That must be right.
Yeah. Well, I have so many other things I want to talk to you about, but I want to talk about the book. And I know we're getting up against the clock here. But before we move on to the book, let me ask you about the trans athlete debate that you brought up. Is this still an issue? I think what surprises me is how tiny proportion of trans athletes is to the greater body of athletes, yet it's still a thing. Or is it? Because now the IOC has pretty much deferred everything to the governing bodies of each sport. The NCAA has just recently, as I understand it, said that it's limited to student athletes assigned female at birth. So where are we on this today?
It is a tiny percentage. It is still a thing because it's been used as a political cudgel under the guise of, quote unquote, protecting women athletes, while actual protection of women athletes from sexual assault, lack of resources, lack of funding, trying to dismantle the Department of Education and Title IX, and all of the actual things that affect the hundreds of thousands and millions of female athletes are not discussed by any of these people. They would prefer to focus on the couple of trans athletes. There are 500,000 NCAA athletes. There are fewer than 10 trans athletes trying to compete.
Yeah. 0.002%.
And yet they are putting millions of dollars into advertising, executive orders, groups and organizing groups to help fight this problem that isn't a problem. Now, would you say, is it still a thing? It's a thing for kids who want to be included and are now being prevented from doing so. And I think that's where you could tell that there isn't a genuine interest in discussing what's best in these conversations for the most part from those who want just bans across all, is preschool. They want bans of preschool kids where we're always playing sports together. Yeah, right. They want bans at junior high. And just understanding that sports is one of the few places where we do separate based on gender, and then not understanding how that's an important space for someone to feel their identity and to be in a place that they feel welcome and included. There are different policies and laws, and there have been across sports for decades at every level, from collegiate to Olympic to everything. So the idea that we would need to enforce at junior high and high school levels, to me, is very much about using it as a political cudgel and not actually about fairness.
Yeah, because I mean, most of those kids haven't even begun the process of transitioning. I'm guessing it does get to the point where, where there's something on the line, where there's a collegiate, NCAA event or an Olympic event. But can you see, though, how two things can be true on this, Sarah? You can support them in their journey 100%, but at the same time think it's just inherently unfair to compete against cis women. Is that controversial?
Only in the sense that the science hasn't proved it out yet, and we need more science. We know that cis men have biological advantages over cis women at a certain point, and based on events and everything, that the testosterone part of it is more beneficial in certain track and field events or certain parts of performance. What we don't have long-term studies or any real studies on are elite athletes, cis women and trans women, right? Now, that's not to be ignorant to the idea that there are likely benefits, particularly of having gone through puberty before transitioning and otherwise. But again, there are rules around all of that at the at the college, Olympic, et cetera level. There have not been instances of people taking other people's scholarships or all this other stuff. And yet we're fear-mongering about what could happen without science behind it. And that's really all that folks are saying is, let's get the data, because there is an inherent misogyny in the idea that no matter what heights men achieve, we marvel at them. And as soon as women get to be a certain greatness, we accuse them of being men. We accuse them of cheating. And especially when the fix for it right now is to allow girls to have their genitals inspected. And that's what's being reintroduced at the track level, is gender and sex examinations. And if you think that the current issue of sexual assault and harassment in women's sports is bad now. Imagine what it's like if a coach can say to a girl, hey, I don't want to tell anyone else this, but you're suspected of being male. So I just need to check and make sure. And then I won't tell anyone. We'll make sure that it doesn't get out. But otherwise, I'm worried if I don't double check, people are going to keep asking and you might get outed for. And then use that as a way to get into the spaces. Look at Larry Nassar. Look at what happened with an unchecked man who used the spaces that he was allowed in and the privilege that he has as a doctor to abuse countless women. If we start having gender examinations as part of proving that you're allowed to compete, we are opening up so many more girls and women to this behavior that we're so claiming to be so worried about, instead of using science to lead us.
All right, we'll leave that there. It is murky and it's complicated. But let's get on to the book because I read it, runs in the family. I actually listened to it on Audible, as I do with a lot of books. And I highly recommend that because you narrate it. It was obvious to me that you put a lot of research into this, and it actually started with an article you had written for ESPN, correct?
Yep, a couple of years ago, an E60 feature and a written piece.
And so what was it about this story that made you decide to write a book about it?
Well, my friend Skip Tramontana played college football with Dylan McCullough. And when Dylan called his former teammates a handful of years ago and said, y'all are not going to believe this story about his identity and his birth parents, he's an adopted guy, Skip told me that story in about 5 minutes total over beers, and I had chills and I was on the verge of tears and I was like, what is this story? So I took it to ESPN and it went viral. It went huge. And there were so many people fascinated by the story. We started getting book and movie offers. And at the time I was so overwhelmed with all my other jobs. But a couple of years ago, when I started being part-time for ESPN and doing other jobs, I had the opportunity to sit down and actually think about what it would look like to write the book. And that's when we did it.
So I don't want to give away any of it, and I hope people don't go and Google it. If you don't know about this story, read the book because there are so many
crazy
amazing
twist,
and you do a great job of dropping little nuggets along the way.
Thank you.
But let's talk about some bigger picture issues that I took away from it. And when Dylan found out he was adopted, he didn't think it was a big deal until he saw how angry his brother was about it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think, as a kid, that word doesn't mean that much to you if you feel included in everything else, unless you hear kids using it as an insult, or until his brother reacted strongly to his mother finally telling him. She didn't tell him until he was about 7 years old, and he didn't really know exactly what it meant. Also, I think the reason I made sure to really flesh out Youngstown as almost a character in the book is Youngstown, Ohio, post-steel mill collapse was a really tough place to grow up. There was not a lot of jobs. There was a lot of crime. There was a massive mafia presence. And so to understand why a kid could be satisfied with the answer of you're adopted, but, let us know if you want to know anything more about it, and think, I don't want to create trouble. I don't want to add more to people's plates. Everybody's dealing with so much here. It feels navel-gazy to care about my identity and where I came from and my birth parents. And for him to be okay with that for so long, not even really looking until his 40s, I needed to be able to explain to people why he felt that way. And it really was about how everyone was struggling. His mom was just trying to put food on the table.
Right. Oh, my gosh. The story is about how she used to boil water to warm the place up. But the Adele and AC, his adoptive mom and dad, you talk a lot about Adele because she was a critical part of his life. And she would be there, you write, no matter what. She was his mother, always will be. No different if she gave birth to him or chose him. Mm-hmm. But that wasn't the case with his dad, AC, and that's part of what really haunted Dylan later in life.
Yeah, I think to be adopted and to have your adoptive father leave when you're 2, now you're sort of doubly rejected by your birth parents and by an adoptive parent. And if the person who chose you, and that choice is supposed to be as bond as your DNA and your blood and your relationship, and they leave, then what does that mean about any of the people in your life and whether they can leave you? There's a ton of research about how adopted folks, even if they aren't told that they're adopted, tend to have a predominance of self-doubt, abandonment issues, etc., that they think is likely rooted to attachment theory of being inside a mother who then you do not have the connection to after you're born, right? That 9 months of that then they're gone. And so he already had abandonment issues. He already had issues of self-doubt and worthiness. So for then this dad to leave, and to top it off is a local DJ in town who he hears on the radio every day, who he sees around town all the time, but has no interest in being a part of his life. That definitely added to a lot of his feelings about like lacking this male presence and concerns about who he was.
The thing that stood out to me too, and it's a theme in the book from Dylan's mom, Adele, where she says all the time, you make the choice. And it's such a critical piece of parenting advice, no matter what situation you're in. Kids need to understand that it really is, in the end, up to them, no matter their situation.
Yeah, and that's really important for Dylan because the arc of his story and how he was in Youngstown with a single mom, no phone sometimes, no electricity, how he worked his way in football to find his way out, made his way to the NFL, made his way to coaching, was a principal, was helping young at-risk youth, found his way to winning a Super Bowl with the Chiefs, and then eventually this incredible twist about his birth parents. He wants you to know that he wasn't at the whims of fate. Those were choices. He worked hard to get the opportunities. He chose to be present for his own kids. He chose not to recreate the abuse, the physical abuse that he grew up with in his home. He chose not to drink and do drugs like the people around him. And I think, especially for an adopted child, if you think about it, you could get adopted and dropped anywhere. You could be from anywhere. You could be named anything. You could have any family. And you could feel like you're missing a lot of choice in your life and missing a lot of your own individuality. And for him, he wanted people to know this isn't chance that led my life. It's choice for me.
Yeah, I will always remember, because you just touched on this, and it's an important part of the book too, about this chain sort of trauma and abuse that continues through kids who are abused or have suffered trauma. I remember one of my good buddies as a kid lived in a horrible home. His mom was an alcoholic and abusive physically and otherwise, and dated just horrible men who beat her and beat him. And, you know, he was steadfast. This is not going to happen to me. I know there's a chain, but Dylan makes this point that this is not going to happen to him. What he lived through, I don't want anyone else to experience. My kids are going to know I love them and I will never leave them.
Yeah, I think one of the things I really wanted to do in writing the book was, of course, it's Dylan's story, but I want anyone reading it to be able to find their own family in it and ask themselves the same questions. What am I passing on via blood, and what am I passing on via messaging and family systems and emotional DNA? What are the things my family always says, and do they serve the next generation, and do they serve me? Things can end with you. The idea that the family messages you have are irrefutable like DNA is just not true. So this whole study of Dylan is nature versus nurture. What does he get from his birth parents? What does he get from his adoptive family? What does he want to carry with him? And I think, you know, the example I often use is, if you grow up in a family where you say, no matter how hard we work, we never seem to have enough, you could be in abundance later and still always have that feeling of worry that you're going to run out. Or if you grow up in a family that says, times are tough, but it always works out, you're going to probably. And so you don't have to pass on the messaging if it doesn't serve you or your kids. And a lot of folks, I think, don't get that.
The other critical part of Dylan's success, and you point this out in the book too many times, are all the guardian angels in his life.
Yeah, and I think that there's a statistic around that if kids have just one adult who takes an interest in them and believes and supports them, it makes all the difference in the world. And so for him, he had that person in Adele, but he also had these teachers and coaches and even friends who saw something in him and helped him avoid the pitfalls of Youngstown at the time, kept him from dealing drugs, kept him from missing his prom because he didn't have money, drove him places when he didn't have a car, looked out for him. And I think for him, what always was fascinating in talking to him, having had this very tough life, was all gratitude all the time. He's so grateful for what he did have. He's so grateful that his mom did X or Y. There are so many kids that would be resentful that they needed a teacher to pay for their prom, or that they never had a car, that they didn't have electricity. And I really wanted to dig into why he felt so grateful. And to me, the idea that he saw those guardian angels as helping him get to where he needed to be and where he should be, that he was destined for something. And I think that informed all his choices and kept him from being depressed or sad or thinking that there wasn't a way out.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many great lessons and aphorisms in the book, and things you learn about everything from fatherhood to family to coaching even. I mean, the coaches who use anger to motivate rather than desire to have the players want to succeed and perform for them. There's so much that you take away from this book. What would you say writing this book taught you the most about yourself, maybe, and your family, and what we should all take away from it?
Well, I think it's a continued thing for me. I've gotten really into understanding like psychology and people's individual pathologies. And I think I gave myself a lot of credit throughout my life for being successful and not making major mistakes and all this other stuff. And the older I get, the more I recognize I have tremendous mental health privilege in that I'm not battling depression, anxiety, other things. And I have tremendous family privilege, not just in terms of, having enough money to go to Cornell and do all these things, but also that my parents didn't saddle me with their own issues and their family issues. I came up in a great, supportive, wonderful family who always made me feel worthy and always made me believe in myself. And when I, in the past, have taken credit for a lot of things, including things like not getting caught up in drugs and stuff like that, I always thought, why would you make such bad decisions? Why would you want to numb yourself? Why would you want to? And the more I understand what other people have dealt with and what they've had to go through, the more I understand it's not as simple as waking up every day and being like, wow, life is amazing. How lucky am I get another day of sunshine and dolphins and rainbows? A lot of people wake up and go, how can I be expected to live another day of this world? And so I think writing about it and also wanting to make sure I gave out fully fleshed out, multidimensional characters who you understood that maybe Adele was doing her best, even if you judge her for some choices that she made, that not always did her intentions match her outcomes. She's not a villain for that. She's a hero for how hard she tried for her kids and how much she sacrificed for them, while also acknowledging that she made some bad choices and she brought some bad men in the house. And in order to really fully understand everybody in the book and all the people that are real life people that I'm writing about and working with, I needed to give grace, and I needed to understand that my success is not fully because of just, I'm a good person, I'm doing it right. It's that I didn't get saddled with so many things that other people do. So I would say that's the biggest takeaway. And the second one is what I talked about earlier, is to really understand what are the messages that your family always said, and are you choosing to pass them on, even if they don't serve you or the next generation? Or can you say that ends with me? I want my kids to feel supported. I want my kids to know I love them. I want my kids to say, you get ice cream as long as you do your best. It's not just about whether you won or not. And all those things. I think that, and that you can even heal backwards. You can go back to parents, grandparents, people that came before you, and help them be given the tools to deal with the things that they might have been handed that no one ever gave them the grace or the time to handle well.
All right. On that note, I know I need to let you go, but finish this sentence for me on the way out, Sarah. Because I grew up in Chicago, I am
tough as shit. and I'm giving myself a long fill in the blank. Probably going to talk about Chicago to every single person I meet, no matter how sick they are of hearing how great it is.
Sarah, we will leave it there. I know your schedule is just bonkers. I appreciate you coming on. Congratulations on Good Game. I know it's really the space and the lane you have always wanted to be in, and now that you're there, I hope it brings you all the success that comes with that excitement to be a part of it.
Thank you so much for having me.
Take care. My thanks to Sarah for making time. Again, her podcast, Good Game, drops every day on iHeart, focusing on women's sports. Shout out to Brian Griggs with Brian Griggs Productions. He does all our audio editing. Chicago vibraphonist Thaddeus Tukes came up with the original theme music. And my thanks to Bill Curtis for the introduction. I'm Joe Donlin. I'll see you on CBS News Chicago. It's available everywhere on the CBS News app. And as always, I thank you for listening to Chicago Unscripted.